Tens of thousands of people in U.S. immigration detention are stuck in limbo as they wait for their immigration proceedings to conclude. These immigrants are detained in facilities under conditions that are often comparable to criminal prisons. In fact, some of them are criminal prisons. But as recent data has shown, less than 25% of these people have criminal records. Unless there is an urgent change in immigration detention policies, this trend is likely to persist. I'm Andres Mejer, immigration attorney and an immigrant myself. And in today's video, we'll be talking about the U.S. immigration detention system, ICE policies, and detained immigrants with criminal records. We'll talk about the trends in immigration detention over the past few years and why there is a need to reform the system. On the same note of immigrants in limbo, we'll also touch upon the fate of dreamers and why it is necessary for Congress to act on DACA now in the second part of this video. If you've started your immigration journey or are thinking of doing so, stay tuned to learn all the facts about U.S. immigration detention as well as DACA and the changes you can expect in both in the coming time. If you like these videos, please subscribe to our channel, give us a like, and share with friends and family who you think this could be of interest. Topic number one. Over 75% of immigrants in U.S. detention are not criminals. Yes, my friends, you heard that right. 75% of immigrants in U.S. detention are not actually criminals. So we're going to start off this video, my friends, talking about the United States immigration detention system, which is the largest of its kind in the world, holding tens of thousands of immigrants every day. It's a civil detention, not criminal, and it's basically meant to ensure that immigrants who are considered a flight risk attend the court of their U.S. immigration proceedings. Immigration detention is also designed to hold immigrants who present a danger to the community for those waiting to hear whether they'll be deported from the country. To put it simply, detention is just a state of suspension for immigrants in which they're neither here nor there until their court hearings are complete. So who detains immigrants? Well, several U.S. Department of Homeland Security agencies, including Immigration Customs Enforcement, ICE, and Customs Border Protection, CBP, are responsible for detaining immigrants who have committed or are suspected of committing civil immigration violations. While they both hold migrants, CBP focuses on the first 72 hours to process immigrants, while ICE detains them for much longer periods. Apart from CBP or ICE is the Office of Refugee Resettlement, which places unaccompanied alien children, meaning minors, in shelters and facilities across the country. Now, Office of Refugee Resettlement, or ORR, is part of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. It's important to note that unaccompanied immigrants, children, in ORR are not included in the federal government's immigration detention statistics. Believe it or not. Immigrant detention process. Now that we've covered who, let's talk more about what the process looks like. Immigrants awaiting deportation and those suspected of visa violations like illegal entry or other civil immigration violations are held in any one of the 214 public and private detention facilities in the nation's civil immigration detention system, which are managed and overseen by ICE enforcement and removal operations known as ERO. ICE detains non-U.S. citizens from the inside of the country, the interior, and those transferred from the border who it believes require supervision. From the border is usually Customs and Border Patrol, hence the B in border. After that, ERO becomes responsible for monitoring and processing detained as well as non-detained immigrant cases until court proceedings are complete. At the conclusion of the proceedings, ERO puts the judge's order into effect, be it deportation or release from detention. I'm sure all of you know someone that at some point was caught at the border or was put in detention and was given ankle monitoring or was told to report to an ICE officer. Well, that ICE officer is under the supervision of ERO. That's what ERO does. Monitors to ensure that someone shows up for court. The Obama administration policies dictated that asylum seekers who passed the first step in seeking asylum by proving a credible fear of persecution, could be granted parole and released from detention centers until a judge heard their case. However, the Trump administration canceled parole for asylum seekers, which led to an increased number of immigrant detainees. This trend has persisted this year. The number of immigrants who passed the first step in seeking asylum increased in 2021, but the number of asylum-seeking detainees released from detention did not increase proportionally. As Heidi Altman, policy director at the National Immigrant Justice Center, puts it, quote, "By ICE's own policy, these are people that shouldn't be in detention any longer," end quote. And yet, ICE has made no move to release most of these long-term detainees. I know for our purposes, I had a client that was detained for 560 days. Now, some of that was criminal detention, some of that was before his case was heard for asylum, but ultimately we prevailed at trial. But 565 days, that's a really long time to be in jail. And he was in jail. They called it immigration detention, but the jail that he was housed in was the same state jail where criminals go. Yes, they were separated, but it's the same location with the same facilities. No one should be detained that long, particularly as a non-criminal offender. And while immigrant detainees are waiting for their cases to be reviewed and processed, they are subject to less than ideal living conditions in some of these detention centers. Detention facilities that hold immigrants have been linked to human rights violations. These include poor treatment, including unsafe and unsanitary conditions, assault and abuse, negligent medical care, and excessive use of solitary confinement. For people who have sought asylum or permanent residence through immigration to the United States, this situation can prove demoralizing, to say the least. These are people who have come to the US to flee persecution or improve their lives, but instead, they're met with detention and uncertainty about what will happen next. Could you imagine if you're fleeing your country, horrible conditions, you traveled a long way, and then you're jailed for a year and a half? That is not what America should be about. Mandatory immigration detention. So how does ICE determine who needs custodial supervision in the form of immigrant detention and who doesn't in the first place? According to the 1996 Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act, IRA, which I loathe, I gotta tell you, certain categories of migrants are subject to mandatory immigrant detention. What this means is that individuals falling under these categories must be detained for the entirety of their immigration proceedings. The categories include all non-citizens, including lawful permanent residents who have been convicted of an aggravated felony, such as assault, theft, burglary, or illegal drugs or firearms trafficking, or in some cases, crimes of moral turpitude. Immigrants who are convicted of aggravated felonies are supposed to serve out their sentence in prisons and jails, not immigration detention centers, just like US citizens. But what often happens is they complete their jail sentence for the crime that they committed, and then they may spend months or years additionally on top of that in immigration detention centers. Talk about demoralizing. However, unlike US citizens, once they've been released, immigrants, they can be detained under mandatory immigration detention and even deported afterwards. ERO officers are supposed to consider factors such as the person's criminal record, immigration history, ties to the community, risk of flight, and whether he or she poses a potential threat to public safety before apprehending immigrants for detention and keeping them apprehended. As you've probably figured out by now, immigrant detention is arbitrary detention that has a great potential for being abused. And as recent data released by the Transactional Research Access Clearinghouse, or TRAC, at Syracuse University shows, by the way, I gotta say, I love TRAC. I've used their statistics many a times for what happens in the courts and what happens with the agencies. So usually when I'm talking about how many people something has happened, those are numbers come from TRAC, the Transactional Research Access Clearinghouse, which is managed by Syracuse University. So recent data from TRAC shows that detention is arbitrary. To begin with, according to the data released on October 1st, 2021, there were a total of 22,129 immigrants detained by ICE on that day. Out of these, 4,996 had been arrested by ICE, while 17,133 had been arrested by CBP. Remember, ICE is usually interior of the country, CBP is exterior coming into the US. This imbalance in numbers shows that most of the immigrants in detentions were actually asylum seekers who arrived at the border and asked for protection, not criminal immigrants already in the country. In fact, data reveals that 16,740 of the 22,129 immigrants currently in ICE detention on October 1st are not criminals at all. That's a staggering 75.6% of immigrant detainees that do not have a criminal record and are detained only due to their civil immigration violations. Remember, a couple of weeks back, I gave the numbers for illegal re-entry in the federal criminal courts. 30% of all federal criminal offenses are illegal re-entry. What's illegal re-entry? Someone who was deported from the United States and returned. That's it. Yes. Is it a crime? That illegal re-entry is a crime, no question about that. But is it violent in nature? No. 30% out of the 4,000, so returning to the stats from right now, out of the 4,537 ICE detainees that are convicted criminals in the cases held October 1st, most have only minor offenses, such as a traffic violation, not serious crimes that make them a threat to public safety. When I say traffic violations, I'm not really referring to a DUI. That is considered a criminal offense by most states. But driving without a license, driving with a suspended license, speeding ticket, fleeing the scene of an accident, tailgating, all of these are traffic violations. Turning without a signal, failure to stop at a red light, failure to stop at a stop sign, traffic violations, of which the majority of them are either driving without a license or driving with a suspended license, which in New Jersey might get you a day in jail. And for that, you could be detained by ICE. So be careful. If you're in New Jersey and you don't have an order of arrest and you don't have an order of removal, get your New Jersey driver's license. It might save you from immigration detention. Since June of 2018, more than half of all people in ICE detention with criminal records committed non-violent misdemeanors or violations at most, which are level 3 offenses at most. 22% of these criminal convictions in immigrant detainees were for improper entry to the United States, like I said before. Keep in mind that none of these crimes are level 1 offenses, such as assault, burglary, drug trafficking, and that nature. Those would warrant mandatory immigrant detention. What is also interesting to note is that the numbers of immigrant detainees with criminal convictions has steadily declined over the past 5 or so years, while the number of immigrant detainees without criminal convictions has only increased at the same time. So, criminal conviction numbers go down, non-criminal detainees go up. Go figure. That's the Trump administration in a nutshell. Now, most immigrants in detention facilities have only civil immigration violations. When we compare data of non-criminal detainees, 16,740 immigrants, again, 75.6 of the total, to data from 2015, when the number of immigrant detainees with no criminal convictions was 10,000, or 40%. It's glaringly obvious that the Trump administration's claim of immigrant criminality were BS. This is particularly disheartening when you consider that these claims, along with other Trump-era policies, led to a significant increase in the number of detention facilities in the country, many of them for profit, meaning they don't work for the state. Track also found an institutional unevenness in a distribution of immigrant detainees without criminal conviction. In 2019, most detainees, 85%, without a criminal record, were held in only 1/3 of ICE's 214 detention centers. In the 2021 fiscal year, ICE detained the greatest number of immigrant facilities in Texas. Texas, number 1 of all immigrant detention. As of October 2021, South Texas ICE Processing Center in Pearsall, Texas, held the largest number of ICE detainees. The facility detained an average of 747 immigrants per day. The second largest of detainees were held in Stewart Detention Center in Lumpkin, Georgia, where the daily average was 619. And those numbers have likely now only gone up. States like New Jersey that decided they're not going to house ICE detentions, what happens? Where do they go? Well, they go in areas like New Jersey and New York, where they could have access to competent immigration counsel, and instead they're moved somewhere in the middle of the country where there's literally not much nearby. There is no family that can go visit them. and there's very little immigration attorneys. I wonder why that would be. Let's talk about immigrant detention trends. As you can see, the data from the track paints a bleak picture of immigrant detention, but has it always been like this? We know that the highest number of ICE detainees was recorded during the 2019 when the Trump administration implemented strict immigration policies. Detentions had hit a peak in 2019 under President Donald Trump at just over 50,000. But several factors also combined to drive down detention rates in 2020, including COVID-19, during which ICE was ordered by the courts to reduce the detention rate, not because they did it on their own volition. They didn't have a damn choice. This came considering the gross mishandling of the COVID-19 pandemic inside immigration detention facilities, where the infection rate was 5 times that of prisons and other incarceration facilities, and 20 times, that's 5 times 5 times 5 times 5, well, that's 25, but you get my idea. 20 times more that of the population at large. So really, going to immigrant detention was putting your life at risk in so many ways. There was inadequate social distancing and personal protective equipment and a lack of sanitation and access to care, which is one of the biggest failures of the immigration detention system to date, and that's a big one. Despite it all, the detention rates inside ICE facilities did go down in 2020, and people expected it to stay down once Biden assumed power. However, not what happened. The number of immigrants and undocumented people detained by ICE has increased dramatically since the start of President Joe Biden's administration in January 2021. ICE and track data shows a 20-year low in the detention population in February of March of 2021 at around 14,000. But by August 2021, the number of people detained by ICE nearly doubled to become 27,000. Recent data from October 1st, 2021 puts the number at 22,129, which is lower than before, but certainly not as low as it should be, considering President Biden's promise to reform the immigration system, to make it more humane, and to end for-profit detention centers. However, there is a silver lining. Legislation such as the Dignity for Detained Immigrants Act and Freedom for Families Act is waiting on congressional action, and if passed, could transform the immigration detention system completely. That's a pretty big if. Apart from that, new Biden administration guidelines published on September 30th, 2021 directed ICE agents to focus on arresting immigrants who pose a significant safety threat. This directs immigration officers to exercise their discretion to focus on detaining immigrants on a case-by-case basis rather than using categories of specific offenses, which is a step in the right direction. Ultimately, the administration's priority should be dismantling the flawed immigration detention system in favor of better, more effective alternatives. As Biden said during his candidacy for the presidency, proven alternatives to detention and nonprofit case management programs which support immigrants as they navigate their legal obligations are the best way to ensure that they attend all the required immigration appointments. There is a way forward, and immigrants are counting on President Biden's administration to protect their interests and create a fair and humane immigration system. Biden is failing in too many ways. He needs to step up and he needs to fulfill his promises. Topic number 2, a future in limbo. Why Congress must act on DACA now. As 2022 approaches, it has become abundantly clear that Congress's involvement is imperative for the secure future of DACA immigrants, as DACA was designed for the children of immigrants who unlawfully resided in the U.S. but have spent their entire life living as Americans just without a title. The Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals Program, DACA, is a memo cum policy established by former President Barack Obama and then Secretary of Homeland Security Alejandro Mayorkas in 2012. Actually, I'm sorry. Secretary of Homeland Security was Jeb Johnson in 2012. It serves as temporary deferral action for deportation of immigrant children who do not have citizenship status. After prolonged anxiety, fear, and uncertainty for such children and their families regarding their future prospects, DACA served as a stepping stone policy. After 9 years of several executive orders, legal battles, court proceedings, and rulings, the absence of congressional involvement in the matter has left DACA's dreamers in limbo. To draw a timeline from the genesis of this policy to the present day, it's important to touch upon the DREAM Act bill proposed in 2007, 14 years ago, almost 15 now. This legislation represents the footsteps in which DACA should have followed, or perhaps what it should have been all along. DACA recipients are referred to as dreamers, a moniker derived from the DREAM Act, D-R-E-A-M. The bill was aimed to be a robust tool that would allow immigrant children a shot at permanent residence and documentation in the U.S. It was proposed in Congress in 2007, where it was unable to pass due to bipartisan filibuster. In simple terms, this means that Democrats and Republican parties could not reach an agreement due to delays or preventative tactics. It was considered again in 2011 and 2013, but it either could not be passed in the Senate or it could not be passed in the House, but in no occasion has it passed both. And ultimately, the DREAM Act could not come to fruition, and shortly after, former President Obama introduced the DACA policy to offer a degree of relief to undocumented immigrant children. The DACA policy was never intended to be a long-term or final solution to the undocumented status of immigrant children. When the President Obama introduced the memo, he termed it a temporary stopgap that would accommodate the undocumented children in limbo. The temporary aspect persevered, however, and their permits are renewed every 2 years. The mentally exhausting process of repeating registration after 2 years, along with the fear of deportation, greatly affects the quality of life for DACA recipients. By the way, same is true for TPS holders. The people currently registered under DACA gain work permits, a social security number, and short-term protection from deportation. These few privileges have opened a plethora of opportunities and security for immigrant children. They can experience a scope of American opportunity and freedoms and progress to great potentials. Statistics show that DACA policy has had a positive impact on the mental health as well as poverty rates of undocumented immigrants with no adverse outcomes to the American economy. In fact, they represent diversity and inclusive contribution to the economy, a core tenet of American ideals. After Congress's failure to pass the DREAM Act, the short-term nature of the DACA policy has been stretched and extended to provide some relief to immigrant children. When President Trump was elected in 2016, his anti-immigrant political stance, along with Republican hostility towards immigration, made DACA's fate unpredictable. In 2017, the heartbreaking decision was made by the Trump administration to phase out or discontinue the DACA policy in phases. The first step was blocking new applicants from accessing the protections offered under DACA. Luckily, his action was stopped by the Supreme Court and lower courts, ruling that the decision to rescind DACA was unlawful. Not that he couldn't rescind it, just that he didn't do it right. When President Biden took office in 2020, he took up a pro-immigrant stance and assured that the DACA policy would remain in effect. This seems to be the case until July 2021. U.S. District Judge Andrew Mejer, anybody who's heard my analysis of the cases out of Texas know I've talked about Judge Andrew Mejer a number of times because of his clear opposition to immigration and his anti-immigration decisions. He's out of the district court in Texas, and he opposed the DACA policy and immediately ordered a partial end to it. He also ended DAPA. His arguments were contingent on the idea that the policy was illegal because it did not implement the correct procedural steps towards authorizing the policy. He said other things, but that's the core of it. He's right, and the burden of responsibility falls on Congress's refusal to settle the fates of hundreds of thousands of DACA immigrants. The way the DACA was implemented under President Obama was not procedurally correct. That's why President Biden has made efforts to correct that now. Since DACA was implemented without the normal rulemaking required by the Administrative Procedures Act, that's what I mean by not done right, President Biden has sought to change by proposed new rules, and the comment period ends on November 29th, 2021. This doesn't justify Congress's inaction. While the Biden administration has appealed the decision to the Texas district courts, the aftermath has already affected many. The court order has stopped any new applications for DACA, while the future of previously registered individuals is yet to be decided. Judge Mejer's decision makes clear that congressional involvement is necessary, if for no other reason than to avoid the never-ending lawsuits on DACA. It is likely the Supreme Court will have to intervene in this case as Congress continues to remain absent in the matter. The lives and prospects of an estimated 640,000 undocumented immigrants registered under DACA are on the line, and Congress can no longer evade its responsibility to its people. 70% of voters in the United States, I'll say that again, 70% of voters in the United States have expressed support for allowing undocumented immigrants a procedure to gain permanent citizenship status. The mandate is the responsibility of the Biden administration and Congress to deliver on their constitutional responsibility. That's a nice way of saying, do your damn jobs. But they continue to disappoint. Just passing a bill in favor of the previously established parameters of DACA is no longer enough either. DACA was never intended to be a long-term action for undocumented immigrants, and the bill guarantees a journey to permanent resident status is required. For DACA recipients, America is their home, and they have spent most of their lives not just living, but also contributing to the United States' progression and growth. They deserve a status that is appreciative and one which secures their present and future. All eyes are on Congress now. That concludes our video for today. If this video was of value to you, please consider liking and sharing it with people who may find it helpful. Also, drop any immigration-related questions you have in the comments below, and we'll try our best to provide an answer for you. You can call us today if you want to discuss your case or need help on your green card or immigration journey. We will let you know if and how we can help. Thanks for watching. Until next time, stay healthy and be well.